Hey folks, welcome back to the Podcast Digest, episode 139. My name's Dan Lizette, and thank you very much for joining us again, taking the time to listen. I hope you're ready for another great conversation, and if you are, tell a friend about this show, folks. Leave an iTunes review. Talk about it on social media with hashtag TPD, all those fun things. Before we jump into this week's show, though, I want to take a quick moment and thank my wonderful Patreon supporters. There's a link in every single show notes episode, folks. If you'd like to help support this little independent show for as little as $1 a month, your support would be greatly appreciated over on Patreon. And this week's episode is also brought to you by my friends over at Fireside. It's a podcast hosting and analytics platform. It's created by podcasters for podcasters. Fireside.fm/TPD. You'll get 20% off the standard plan for your first 3 months, and I'll tell you a little bit more why I think they're awesome a little bit later on. But let's get to this week's show, folks. I've got a returning guest. I've been thinking about coming up with some kind of like spiffy name for these type of check-ins with previous guests. I don't know, like the callback series or something like that. I don't know, workshop that. Shoot me something on Twitter. Let me know what I should be calling these series. But now I check back in with somebody I haven't spoke to since September of 2015, and I break down all of this before. And her life and her show has dramatically changed and evolved and gone through lots of iterations and acclaim in the, I don't know, about 20 months or so since we last spoke. There's a link in the show notes, folks, to the original time that my guest Megan Tan from Millennial and Radiotopia appeared on the Podcast Digest. And if you're not listening to Millennial, I think you're listening wrong. Millennial is awesome. Megan is one of my favorite people in all of podcasting to talk to. She's got a great product, a great show, and has been doing amazing things with it ever since. Her journey into this world has been something she's been chronicling all along, and she's a great storyteller, great radio producer, great podcaster that you really should be listening to. And it was great to get to catch up with her. So without further ado, let's hop right now into my conversation with Megan Tan from Millennial. Hey folks, welcome back. As I mentioned up front, my guest this week making her return to the Podcast Digest. It has been since September 13th of 2015 on episode 57 I last spoke with my guest this week. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest, Megan Tan.
Hi, Dan. It's good to be back.
It's great to have you back. There has been so much happening with you and Millennial, and I thought it would be great to catch people up on all the behind-the-scenes stuff that's been happening. Just to kind of set the stage a little bit, when we last spoke, Megan, I did this little research before we hopped on today. You had 7 episodes out of Millennial. You were non-network affiliated. I believe you had just got just started to dabble into sponsorship. And episode 8, which came out 5 days after our conversation, you were talking about, I went back and listened to it to make sure, this was the episode on you being selected as a finalist for the Kroc Fellowship with NPR. That's how long it's been since we spoke.
Wow, that's kind of crazy.
So lots to talk about, that's for sure. So, but before we jump in, if somebody's just now landing on us, can you tell folks who you are and what is Millennial?
So I'm Megan Tan. I host and produce and am the creator of Millennial, a podcast about coming of age. And yeah, the first season started out being a narrative piece about my life at post-graduation and has since kind of become more broad in terms of scope. And now I feel like we could cover almost any topic because you never stop coming of age.
And you've definitely covered a lot of topics since we last spoke in the ensuing 33 episodes since our last conversation. You've been literally all over the place. We'll get to that in just a second. But there has been so much that's changed with the show. I mean, when we last spoke, it was by and large probably a 95% you effort with Ben kicking in the other 5. The first thing I really wanted to touch on was sort of some of the people and some of the folks you've reached out to and kind of the team that is now sort of around you, creating what folks hear today. And I'm kind of hoping you'll sort of take us through the acquisition of a few of these individuals and kind of how things are functioning day to day in the millennial world?
So a lot of it is still on myself, and then there's also Justine Paradise. She's like Millennial's production assistant, and she works. We see each other almost regularly, and then there's Devin Taylor, who is our editor, and she is based out of New York City and does a lot of work for different podcasts. So she's freelance, and the day to day is, so it's still actually a pretty small team when you think about the kind of work we're striving to create and how frequently we release, right? So you have 2.5 people and one of those people is the host, and so it's still a pretty small team, but we are fortunate in that we can focus. Like Justine and I can focus all of our efforts on Millennial full time. And then Devin, she just loves freelancing. She loves that lifestyle. So that's like her choice.
Yeah, I think Devin's everywhere nowadays.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to remember. She showed up in the credits of an episode of a show, and I said, "Was that you?" And was it Mortified? No, it was something.
Probably The Illusionist. She has that with.
Well, The Illusionist, she's there regularly, but there was another one she popped into, and I wasn't even expecting to hear her. And I said, "Hey, was that you?" And she's like, "Yeah, I helped out for 5 minutes, and that was it." And I'm trying to remember now. Oh, was it Science Versus?
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, she's everywhere. So, yeah, you got to kind of share bits and bobs of her. So,
for sure.
And Justine was was she the result of the posting you spoke about over the last few months? Is that the individual?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. That was for an apprenticeship, and then she's very super skilled and like quickly became like a producer.
So I wanted to ask you, Megan, about some of the things that have changed since we last spoke. One of the things that I noticed, even before we spoke, was that when we last talked and I was sort of getting prepared to the conversation, I felt like listening to those 7 episodes, I was pretty ready to go. Today, I put Megan Tan Millennial Podcast in Google, and there is a Forbes article from yesterday. This is a completely different level of preparation, and I imagine your life's got to feel completely different than it did back in fall of 2015.
Yeah, it does. In some ways, I'm still in Portland, Maine, right? And so there's a level of what do I want to say? Like everydayness that happens,
Right.
where you sometimes I don't feel the weight of Millennial on my shoulders, and I feel like I really need to. And other days I feel it's so much, it's stressful. So things have changed a lot. Like we have, I'm working with someone regularly every day on this show that is still centered around my life partially, and there are a lot of growing pains with that. And then in terms of press online, that I don't know if that affects my everyday, I think it maybe it just looks like it does, but really it is sitting down with someone and talking to them about my experience, and then an article comes up. So I don't know if that is, like that's kind of what every day looks like. It doesn't feel like a lot of things are happening, when I'm sure if I look back, they have been.
Yeah, from an outsider perspective, it certainly would appear so. When you say weight of Millennial, how would you categorize that weight? Well,
We're producing a show every 2 weeks, and with the small team that we have, and we, are still striving to make it feel like a documentary. And my question is like, how is that really sustainable right?
Right.
Right. And so I think that's what I mean by wait is I'm constantly asking myself these questions about, like what is the ideal show? What does it look like? How are we going to grow the show? How are we going to experiment? How are we going to continue to be sustainable with the number of people we have and the resources that we have? Those types of things are the wait. How are we going to continue to make content that is interesting when it's not necessarily about my life, right? Because Millennial, the foundation of it was me extracting experiences from my life. And after a while, your life just kind of catches up with you. And ironic as it is, now that I have this show, like the hard parts are really the mental parts and not anything. Well, I wouldn't say not anything, but I'm no longer like working at a restaurant anymore. So I can't talk about that, right? It's like I'm just trying to make a show. And so the struggles kind of come with those parts, with the part of production and the part of maintaining like a passion project that you created in your closet.
Is there some expectation living up to aspect to this wait that you describe, where obviously Millennial had some pretty significant success pretty early on in terms of in a show's life, be it the Radiotopia pickup or this press recognition, the famous Guardian recognition early on? Or is it almost your own standard that you've set for yourself, or is it sort of a combination of the two?
Oh, I definitely think it's my own standard that I set for myself. Yeah. I mean, I think, well, maybe it's a combination of the two. I think first it's my own standard, because I'm the one who essentially gets to say, I'm the one who gets to make all the calls for the show, right? And so I think a lot of times for me at this moment right now, I still think that the show is trying to find its feet, and what that looks like, and where is it that I want to be as a storyteller and an audio producer, and how does Millennial fit into that? Those are things that I am constantly asking myself and constantly trying to define as we're like flying the ship, right? So there's a lot of that. But I would say that Millennial, that a lot of it is based on is based on my own standard. And also, like, I'm still trying to come to terms with, like, what does it mean to stay in your lane, right? So Millennial, I feel like something that we do really well is we're really transparent and honest and sincere. And my experiences aren't necessarily out of the ordinary, but the things that we try to hit are like those qualities. And for me, I have to constantly remind myself, like, those are our strengths, right? And how do we continue to dive into those strengths while not trying to be a show that has like 3 reporters, and who have been reporting for 20 plus years of their life, which is, which are essentially the podcasts that I like to consume. Right. So that's hard, I think, for me, because I consume episodes and I consume podcasts, and I almost want to be at that level, but that's not necessarily Millennial's strengths, right? Because I don't have any formal journalism training. I'm, a woman in her closet who was just like trying to figure out how to make a good narrative stories and how to do it in a way that is sincere, honest, and transparent. But also, like, I can't keep reporting on myself because well, first of all, it's like really hard for me to talk about myself usually,
I think you said that last time we spoke, and I was surprised then, and I'm still a bit surprised.
Yeah. And to constantly, those are just exercises that I'm, still growing into, I think. And yeah, I'm definitely feeling the growing pains, Dan, for sure.
Here's what I was thinking, and that comment sort of segues nicely into what I wanted to cover next. I would think that, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you've evolved that talking about myself aspect into telling stories about things that are important to you, even if you aren't the central character in the narrative. And that was some of the things I wanted to talk about, because you've tried a lot of different things in, say, season 2 and so far in season 3. Mm-hmm. And I want to sort of understand the creative direction and what those decisions were like, because not every episode so far has been quote unquote about you, at least not as the prime subject. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So has that been sort of the decision you made, where the difficulty in sort of talking about yourself or continually reporting on yourself has sort of been tweaked a bit on sort of shining lights on those things you care about, let's say?
Yeah. Yes. I think that is, what has been happening. I think, I'm constantly thinking about what are the things that I care about, and trying to, like every single night I try to think about what questions do I have about the world, and there are parts where, like, for instance, I don't know anything about life insurance. And we had a call from these people who were trying to sell us life insurance. And I was like, how do you talk about life insurance in an episode that could be really interesting, though?
I could see that being challenging, yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of trying to take these questions that have to do with growing up, but also making them interesting and making them into a narrative that I think is what I can feel the growing pains with. So, yeah, right now, Millennial is an extension of things that I'm curious about. But also, like if I could create like the Millennial, like what the vision of the show is, it would be a show where at any given moment, someone who is 16 now and 25 in 9 years would be able to like look up Millennial and then type in a question or type in some sort of topic and find an episode about it, something that speaks to them.
Right. And
so like that would be, so it's almost like a catalog, right, of what it means and how it feels to grow up. Like that to me is ideal. And so in my head, it's like, how do we get there, and how do we make that type of content that is of good quality now,
Do you ever feel as if, this is a weird question, but I'll just ask it and see what you say. Do you ever regret the title at all?
People have asked me that. No, I don't.
Does it feel like when you talk about weight again, like there's more to wind into this than maybe you thought would be your initial quote unquote responsibility, or is that not really a thought that happens?
Oh, that I need to be representing the voice of our generation?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, there's some weight to that, but I don't know. I mean, I think that ask is really big. And if I focus on that, my head would be spinning.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right? I mean, like, how do you answer that? I mean, there are 80 million of us out there. And I don't think that has ever been the goal. I think I can represent one person who is a part of our generation. And to be honest, like some parts of me, I'm like the worst millennial ever, you know, like I don't have Snapchat. I live in Maine. I don't live in like a big city. Yeah. I mean, there are all sorts of things where I'm sure other millennials are being more millennial than I am.
Levels of millennialism.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, to me, I guess that's just who I am. I can't help it. You know, I just like, yeah.
Pardon the interruption, folks. Let me hop in just for a quick moment to tell you about this week's show sponsor. This week's episode is once again brought to you by Fireside. Fireside is a podcast hosting and analytics platform, and the best part about it, it's created by podcasters for podcasters. So these folks know what they're doing. They understand what your needs are. They completely fill them with the best things in the marketplace. It is a brand new platform started by Dan Benjamin. He's the founder of 5x5. He's taken everything he's learned since he started this thing in 2009 from making podcasts for a living, and now he's turned it into a platform for everyone, for all podcasters at any level of expertise, beginner, expert, anything in between. Fireside's got it all. All the features you really want. Unlimited uploads, unlimited downloads. Forget about any limits. That's so important when you're hosting a show. You get massive amounts of data, stats, and analytics about your downloads. You get a super fast CDN for the best download speeds. That means when your listeners hit download on episode, boop, comes right to them. So you can have multiple podcasts inside Fireside. If you're coming over from another platform like FeedPress, Simplecast, SoundCloud, Libsyn, any of those, one-click importing from those other platforms. Custom domain mapping. If you already have your own domain, you can set up the beautiful, responsive website that Fireside offers right to that domain. You can have your own artwork on there, your host and guest pages, tons of advanced features as well to integrate sponsorship, chapter markers, a bookmarklet for links, auto posting of future episodes, time code linking, and a lot more. I mean, the features are huge, and you got to just take a look at this and figure out if this is what you've been looking for. You can try Fireside for free for 7 days, during which time you can import your existing podcasts for free. Take advantage of every feature Fireside has to offer during that time. If you decide to convert, unlimited plans start at $19 a month. No commitment, no long-term agreement whatsoever to worry about. Better yet, go to fireside.fm/TPD for the podcast digest. Do it right now. You'll be able to take the full tour, see screenshots, everything I've been talking about. When you sign up, though, use the code TPD, 20% off the standard plan for 3 months. You can't beat it. You guys really should take a look at this. Very modern, clean websites and great data. I really very enthralled by what Fireside is offering here. So take a look at them. Fireside, by podcasters, for podcasters. Now, let's continue my conversation with Megan Tan. One of the ways I think you definitely sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, gave a nod to put in effort to make sure that other voices were represented was in season 2. And I wanted to talk about season 2 because that was, in several of those episodes, a significant departure from what a lot of listeners heard in season 1 and definitely what they're hearing in season 3. And we'll get to 3 and Cuba in just a bit. But season 2, because we haven't spoke since then, this was sort of your focus on other people's stories. I kind of want to know sort of what your experience was like, how that felt putting together sort of other people's narratives and just sort of overall the season 2 experience.
I mean, yeah. So to be honest, season 2, I mean, we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants, you know? So,
Right.
yeah, season 2, like one of my favorite episodes was Can't Go Home Again, which is about a friend of mine, Lance, who he he essentially transcended class, and in doing so, like, doesn't have a really good relationship with his family, right? And in putting his story together, being able to intertwine it with mine, I think was really rewarding, because it was like super universal, kind of the feelings that he was going through. And I feel like that is like a millennial episode that, we try to strive to make each time, like that. Yeah. That to me, I do think it's a new challenge to bring in other people's voices, because those people have to have so many qualities, that, I mean, and this just goes back to radio journalism. They have to be a character. They have to have multiple events that have happened in their life, in order to create turns. You can't just, they have to be able to divulge their feelings in a way that's transparent and honest. And sometimes people don't, sometimes you just don't get there. And whereas when I'm making Millennial and it is an episode about me, I have access to all of my emotions and feelings. Right. So that is like that. Yeah. That is I want to say like a growing pain. Of just trying to vet people and find the best stories that have those arcs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, season 2 was super interesting. There, you mentioned the one that you mentioned, folks listening. That was episode 29. You Can't Go Home Again. There was a couple others there that really stood out for me. I mean, a lot of them did, but I just from looking at titles and sort of thumbnails, I explicitly remember several of these episodes. 14, I Never Talk About Politics, with the mayoral candidate. Listening to that now, post national election, is a completely different listen, and it covered topics, and you got in on things that ended up being sort of so prescient in late 16, early 17, and it was a great story, and that was one that really stood out for me in season 2, as well as 27 with Shannon Case, which you exposed me to for the first time by talking with him in that episode, and that caused me to find his show, subscribe, and been a listener ever since. So those are just two of several in season 2 that really stood out to me in terms of things that, even looking back now, I can almost hear the episode still to this day from my first listen. Do you think it's something you might dabble in some more, or is it something that may be more rare?
What do you mean?
The other person's story, so to speak.
Oh, we've already done a couple of other people's stories in season 3.
Right, all of Cuba, pretty much.
Yeah, yep.
Right.
The only episode that we haven't done in season 3 is We Grew Up Here, which is a story. Home. Yeah. But all the other ones have been about other people.
Is it, maybe I asked it backwards. Do you think that this will continue to be sort of the focus, the other topics, and sort of diving in here or there with your own experiences when sort of when it's not a life insurance topic?
Yeah. Yes, I do. Yeah, I think that's the goal. I'm still growing up and kind of maneuvering this 20s period of my life. And then also, but like I said, I can't just talk about myself anymore. So I do think that this is the model, of, figuring out how these stories relate back to my life in some way, but having the majority of it be about someone else until we have those kind of episodes that are about my life, which we will have here and there, because Yeah, I mean,
things keep happening.
Yeah, things just keep happening. We just keep recording. So,
well, let's talk about I don't know if this is a correct statement or not, but one of the biggest events in Millennial's arc since we last spoke, which was the beginning of season 3, the first 4 episodes of season 3, and that was the trip to Cuba. How did this even come about?
So one of my best friends lives in Cuba, and she works with lots of different publications as like a fixer and also a journalist. And I had never visited her in Cuba. She's been there on and off for the last 5 years, and we grew up together. And so we decided that we were going to go, and in a very typical millennial fashion, like work, play, right? So we went, and I mean, one of my goals for the show too, as a dream, is to travel and to talk about how other people are growing up in these spaces. And so I felt like this was a really great opportunity to learn about that. Understanding Cuba in a very short period of time, as someone who was just walking on the street, was extremely, it was a challenge, because...
How long were you there in total?
I was there for about 2.5 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. But still, I mean, your voice in like what you say about these countries, like people are going to totally believe you. So you have to be really conscious in a way that I had never had to be before, right? About just like fact checking and making sure that we weren't making like super generalized statements, but also knowing that like I wasn't reporting on Cuba, because I'm not an international reporter. So knowing where those boundaries are definitely was, I'm just going to keep saying growing pain, but like was definitely a good learning curve for me. And working with Hannah was really great. I mean, it was, Millennial continues to be kind of this experiment. I don't know if you sense that, but
that is a theme. But to me, that seems even more appropriate, right? Because isn't that almost microcosmic for this time in life regardless, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I love that you think that way because...
I mean, it sort of fits, right? I mean, if you had the show all figured out, locked in a nice, pretty little box, and you were just whipping it out, that wouldn't even serve the core of what Millennial was even designed to do in the first place.
I would love that, though. That
would be nice.
That would be that would be a lot less stressful.
Well, then you can move out to beautiful Oakland, California, get to the office right next to Roman, and say, "Hey, I got this too."
Oh man, that would be amazing. I would love to do that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I wonder. I mean, does it? Because one thing I've been thinking about is, we don't want to get too meta, right? Because it's like, we can't do a show about doing the show. But would that be interesting to you?
Oh, I think it would be awesome. I mean, that's the whole genesis of what I do, right? In the sense of, I think people care about this stuff. The reason I'm sort of digging into some of these things is I think people... I have a theory, and I don't know with your crazy calendar if you've how much you've heard of some of my conversations with some of the other guests I've had in the past. But I say this a lot, and I believe that people come for the content, but they stay for the hosts. I really believe that. I've been saying that for years at this point, and I think people, especially. A show that, and that's sort of what some of my questions earlier, Megan, that a lot of the episodes did focus on you and your life, but that even the ones that didn't, people who have gotten to know you over these 40 episodes at this point can see a through line in your belief system, in your value system, in what you care about, in your sense of humor, so on and so forth. And that even when you're going in and touching on these other topics, especially some of the more recent ones where you're tackling 2017 in America, let's say, people still see Megan in those stories, I believe. And so anything that the reason that these shows are resonating, I believe, is that because they're important to you and thus they're resonating with the audience. So the fact that this production process, this making process, would be a story to tell because I think people care about what you're caring about. So I think that's why a show like Startup works, right? These behind the scenes nuts and bolts, these look at all these interview shows. It's what I do. It's what Mark Maron does, Michael Ian Black with How to Be Amazing. These shows that kind of dig into creators and how they became what they are and why they do what they do. People, I think, like to hear stuff like that. So, yeah, in terms of a context for a future episode of Millennial, anything that you're going through with this process, I think people would love to hear about. And, folks, tweet at Megan if you agree with me. Okay? Shoot her an email. Tell her if I'm right or wrong because I believe folks would want to hear it.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, I think so. So I mentioned it just briefly, but you are now, as maybe the world dictates nowadays, jumping into a few more current events, let's call them. This had to be a conversation you had with yourself in that small team. What would take us behind the scenes of getting into some of these things that you've been covering that are a little more political and a little more of the current day?
Yeah. Well, so as you know from I Never Talk About Politics, like I just didn't grow up talking about politics. Like even when I talked to my mom the other day, like she does not watch the news or like she just isn't in the loop of the news. So like the news never came to our kitchen table, right? And so me being consumed by the news is definitely something I just didn't grow up with, and something that I've had to teach myself over time. So, I mean, I was really hesitant about talking about politics because I don't like the idea of isolating people. And I feel like when you talk about politics, you're immediately choosing a side, right? And, and so with the most recent ones, they were, it was like, let's go into this discomfort zone, for me. And the woman who I work with, Justine, she's actually super activist and very political. And we would get into arguments. And so I think we finally decided, this is something that is really important to our generation, to talk about these issues and trying to do them in the best way that we can, without, like I said, knowing how to stay in our lane, right? So we're not going to report on politics because that's not what we do. But we were going to figure out how to explore them, in the community that we're in right now, and maybe ask ourselves these kind of big questions about how do we see change happening? Where does it start? Does it start with you? How does it start with you? And I'm referring to the episode where we get out of our bubble, right? And our
39. 39, right. Yeah.
And
seeing red and blue.
Yeah. And our political bubble. And yeah, I mean, that was definitely I was going to all of these different rallies just to kind of go. I had never really been to a big protest before. I've never been to I've never been to city council. Like I've never been involved in the government in a hands-on civilian kind of way. And all of a sudden, we were going to rallies and going to these different meetup groups and trying to figure out like, what is it that people are doing in order to create change in their communities during this time. And trying to explore that. And what does it mean to take action? That's the thing that I was kind of the most curious about, is in the small ways, like what did that look like?
And to be fair, I don't want to misrepresent what we're talking about here. On both 39 and 40, I don't think you necessarily take you wade into political waters, but you do so in a way that sort of just pulls back the veil and asks questions. You don't pass judgment or necessarily condemn anything. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure people can, like, they know where we stand just based on the content that we are creating, but
right.
But we're not like attacking people for
That's
sure.
what I mean. You're not doing it in a damning way to an alternative point of view, I guess, is sort of what I'm getting at. Yes.
Yeah.
So in these arguments you and Justine are having, is she winning in the sense that listeners may expect a few more of these current events to be tackled in the future of Millennial?
I'm sure. Just as we kind of move forward, but not anytime soon, not in the next upcoming episodes. But I do think, like we did a really timely episode about Pokemon Go,
Oh, that was great.
Over the summer.
I remember that one.
Because we were just like, this is definitely a part of our generation at this moment. And so, I mean, I think I don't have any like political episodes ready to be launched at this moment, but because there came a point where you just couldn't talk about anything without being political, and that to me was fascinating, because I was like, why is this a thing? Why is like every single thought that I have immediately political? And so that was kind of us trying to dive into that. So I'm sure there will be other opportunities for that to happen. Immediately, no, but in the future, I'm sure.
Well, I have a feeling there'll be more Pokemon Go level events in the political world, without doubt, at some point in the future, for sure. Let's shift gears a little bit from the episodes and cover a couple other topics that I wanted to ask you about. Again, last time we spoke, you weren't. Now you are fully ingrained in the Radiotopia family, and I'm just wondering, what has this awesome experience been like?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, they're great people, and they are some of the best independent producers out there, and I feel really honored to be a part of that clan. And it is nice to be able to knock on people's doors and just ask them, like if I'm in a rut in terms of ideas and I'm like, where do you guys go to get your stories, or what are the places where you guys look, or, what are your workflows like? That's been a lot of it, to be honest, is I'm just asking people about, the production of creating one of these shows, because we're all independent, even though we're part of a collective, everybody is working independently. And so I think this last year has been me really understanding what does it mean to be an independent. And so I just have lots of questions for people in terms of content, in terms of structure when you are working with a team of people, right? Because I can't look over my shoulder and see a show, functioning. I have to ask them about it. But they've been super, super supportive. And like Julie Shapiro is, she's like my auntie, say podcast auntie.
So last question for you in terms of new things you've done. And I just noticed this today because I'm a subscriber. I get all new episodes. I listen. I don't go to your website every day. Mm-hmm. So this may have been up here a while, but I just caught it in a preparation for our conversations today. You're doing speaking. Oh, yeah.
Yep, I am.
What is that like? That sounds awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, I think it's a lot of fun. I've done a few speaking engagements, and the first one was extremely nerve-wracking. Like I would never, Dan, what I studied in school was photography and dance, like two non-verbal, non-written forms of expression. And so the fact that I have a podcast where I do a lot of writing and doing like speaking events where I have to use my voice in a way
makes complete sense. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I thought I was just going to do interpretive dances like for the rest of my life. But, yeah, so it's been invigorating in terms of having to push myself into places I've never really conquered before and never really envisioned myself being. But yeah, like it's still a performance, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, I mean, I want to do more of them. I definitely want to do more of them.
It's got to be thrilling, like you said, from where you started. And I'm looking at the website. You've spoken with folks at Converse, TEDx Talk, University of New Hampshire, so on and so forth. I mean, it's like this has to, when you finish something like that, especially when the feedback starts to come in, there has to be a sense of satisfaction that's just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a lot of times it's also with students or in front of a lot of young people. And so to be able to say to young people, hey, like I made this thing in my closet and it's now my full-time job. If I can do it, you can do it, I think that is where a lot of the satisfaction comes from.
That's awesome. That's an awesome. Have you done any of, I think I heard of at least one. I could be wrong. I know Radiotopia has been dabbling a lot in live shows. Have you been a part of that yet?
I have not.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The discussion is like, what would a Millennial live show look like? Like, how would what would make it worth being a live show? And coming from like a dance and photojournalism background, I'm like, yeah, how do you make a radio live show worth seeing live? Right. Can we have some dancers? Maybe, or
now there you talk.
Yeah.
There you go.
So yeah, that's still worth brainstorming, I think right now that like still trying to get a handle on production and like making episodes that we love is still something that I'm focusing on, and then the other stuff I think will hopefully come with time, after it feels like, okay, I got this muscle, maybe I'll never feel that way. I don't know. But I would like to feel that way at some point.
That would be awesome. That would be cool. I could envision it, and I would love to see it happen someday. That would just be awesome. So folks who are looking to get on the Millennial train, can you give them any sense of what they may expect? You mentioned every 2 weeks. Is this an in perpetuity thing, or is there a season 3 wrap date projected at this point, or where do we stand?
Right now I would say we're still thinking about it. Right now it's in perpetuity.
Gotcha.
And yeah.
Until your head officially explodes.
Yeah, kind of.
Then it'll be like, oh, okay, that's the last one for now.
Yeah, yeah.
Take a month off.
Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah. So Millennial will be there.
And if folks want to find it, Megan, where can they do that?
They can go to millennialpodcast.org. You can follow us on Twitter at millennialpdcst, Facebook, Instagram. You can also, check us out at, just type in millennial. I always say 2 L's, 2 N's because people really, it's hard it's hard to type it out sometimes.
I've Googled it wrong.
Yeah.
I know that.
Wherever they get their podcasts, on iTunes, Stitcher, Radio Public.
All the fun stuff. And all those links are going to be in the show notes as always, folks. So, Megan Tan, thanks for coming back and giving us an update on all things millennial. And maybe in another, 90 episodes of the Podcast Digest, we'll have to do this again.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan.
All right, folks, that will do it for episode 139. How awesome is Megan and how awesome is Millennial? If you're not listening to Millennial, seriously, you should be. Whether you're a millennial or not, or, I'm 38 and I find it wildly intriguing of a show. So regardless of your age, if you're pre-millennial, post-millennial, baby boomer, whatever you are, it's a show worth checking out. And it was great to catch back up with Megan, and look forward to doing it again, in another 20 months or so. I can imagine all the amazing things that she's going to be accomplishing. So if you enjoyed this show, folks, talk to me. Talk to me on Facebook. Talk to me on Twitter. Talk to me everywhere you are. Hashtag TPD if you want to talk about the show. I'm at Pod Digest on Twitter, probably the best platform to connect with me in terms of getting an immediate response. I try to reply to everybody who talks with me over there about the show or about anything. Come to my show. You'll hear a lot of, or come to my Twitter page. You'll see a lot of things about, not to mention the Podcast Digest, podcasting in general, and a lot of crazy animal pics and stuff because I love animals. But also, before we go this week, folks, I do want to take a moment and thank this week's show sponsor one more time, Fireside.fm, podcast hosting and analytics, created by Dan Benjamin, founder of 5x5. Guys, use the code TPD when you sign up at fireside.fm/TPD, 20% off the standard plan for the first 3 months. Fireside's by podcasters and for podcasters, and they flip and rock. Thanks for supporting the Podcast Digest. And thanks to you folks. If you enjoyed this episode, share it, tell a friend, tweet it out, put it on Facebook, tell your grandma to subscribe to podcasts, and she can learn about all kinds of awesome ones right here at the Podcast Digest. Until next week, folks, episode 140 coming at you next week, and it will be a big one. I'm telling you, huge guest coming next week right at you. Stay subscribed, tell your friends. Until then, my name is Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest.